What do you say to someone who describes a martini just as a glass of cold gin?
Well, this is something that quite a lot of people have said to me when I've said I've done a book about the martini. How can you write a whole book about the martini? But then I'm often struck by the fact that we're often still having that conversation 10 or even 20 minutes later, because actually once you get the conversation going, even, the most strongest skeptic realizes that there is a lot to say about the martini and so much culture around it and so many stories and so much debate around how you make it and all of these things. So by the end, I think everyone is persuaded that it is one cocktail that really merits a whole book.
More than the sum of its ingredients in respect of its culture, I guess.
Definitely. It's a sort of axis for so much stuff, arts, literature, film, design, and it's this icon. It's a cocktail with its own emoji. It speaks an international language, but it's also a recipe that's as personal as a cup of tea. So everybody can find their martini and their way to sort of, I suppose, express themselves through their choice of martini.
Why do you think that is? Like, how did it get this incredible status?
You mean why didn't the pina colada end up being that drink?
Yeah, or
that?
I mean, another kind of spirit and vermouth drink, even, which there are plenty of examples of. Why that one particular cocktail? Do you think of all the ones, let's say in the Savoy cocktail book, where there's hundreds and hundreds of drinks?
Yeah. No one's put that question to me exactly like that. Why not another cocktail? That's a really good question. I suppose the spareness of it means I read a bartender the other day describing the martini as like a sandbox of a cocktail. So you've got this small area in which to work, but there's quite a lot that you can do within that sandbox. So I suppose having some really clear parameters, although I guess that's even questionable where the parameters are, but a small area in which to work is quite kind of reassuring in one way, but kind of quite a sort of catalyst for creativity at the same time.
Yeah, I guess it's more like a kind of concept of a drink, isn't it? Off which you can kind of riff in many different ways, as we've seen. I get what was the year? Was it the 80s and 90s really, where it was like anything in a martini glass was a martini?
Yeah, exactly. And I think now what we're seeing is bartenders are being armed with a lot of new techniques, learnt from perfumers or Michelin-star chefs, which means that bartenders are now able to create drinks with a whole new spectrum of flavours to them, but which very much still observe that kind of essential character of the martini, which is strong and clear and pure tasting. And I think that's the really exciting development that we've seen in the last sort of 10 years.
So your new book, fantastic book, by the way.
Thank you.
And at the time of recording, as I just said to you before we recorded, it is number one on the Amazon Spirits and Cocktails thing, I think, which is amazing. Because do you know what, that list, there's often a celebrity or someone who's got some affiliation with the book out.
Bloody Stanley Tucci.
I know, Stanley Tucci, yeah. It's not even a spirits and cocktail book.
I know. So
I mean,
boring.
he does mention booze, obviously, but it's a good book. To get to the top of that list is pretty impressive. So
well, you'll know it better than anyone because you're often there, aren't you?
No, I haven't been there for years, unfortunately. But yeah, no, it's a great book.
I mean, what do you think it takes to get to the number one spot?
I think it's like in danger of kind of a swerve in the question. It's like a je ne sais quoi. There's something about the book or the timing of the book. I think is a big one. I mean,
I'd totally say that for my book. I think I've been quite lucky to be catching a wave at the moment.
Yeah. Not that I'm necessarily saying you're being lucky, because it is a great book.
Well, like that thing about the more I practice, the luckier I get. I think you've got to be ready to be lucky.
Yeah, that's it. I think I've only had that with one or maybe two books, the sort of perfect timing. I mean, maybe we can talk about books later, actually. It'd be interesting to get your take on your experience of it. Back to the martini for a second. So we've got this concept of a drink, this sort of typically gin with vermouth, served straight up, olive oil twist is the kind of archetype. How do we sort of rank the importance of these different elements? What do you? Because I'm thinking like gin and vermouth, but clearly a lot less vermouth than gin usually. So the gin is more important, would you say, or the vermouth? How do you think about it?
Yeah, well, I suppose actually I've allowed in drinks to my book that don't even have gin in them. So it could be vodka, or I've got a tequila martini in there and a
I did see that. Yeah.
rum martini by Ian Burrell. And I do feel that those drinks actually observe, again, the sort of essential character of martini. So maybe it's not even gin, but some sort of clear, quite pure white spirits, I think. And then your aromatized wine. I have included the naked or see-through martini in there, which has no vermouth at all, just as a kind of nod to history. But I wouldn't call that a martini, actually. So I think you've got to have some kind of element of aromatized fortified wine in there of some kind.
Even if it's barely detectable kind of thing.
Yeah, just the notion of it.
Because there's some great stories, aren't there, about Churchill making a phone call to France.
Yeah.
That's all the vermouth you need kind of thing.
Yeah, bowing in the direction of France, all of these kind of things. And, the whole industry sprung up in the kind of 50s or so, of people selling kind of martini vermouth atomizers and vermouth stones, which you soaked in vermouth and sort of swished through the gin, or basically creating ritualized ways of adding as little vermouth as possible to your drink, which is just crackers, isn't it? But people bought into it.
Yeah, well, I remember when I first started bartending, coming up to 25 years ago, and we used to be instructed to make martinis at the restaurant I was working at by, you'd fill your mixing beaker with ice, and then you'd pour 15 ml of vermouth into it. You'd stir the vermouth over the ice, and then you'd tip it all away.
Yeah.
And then you'd pour your gin in and continue making the drink. And I at the time, I never really questioned it. It was part of the ritual.
Yeah.
But now I think about it, it must have been something made up by a vermouth manufacturer just to
get you getting through more vermouth.
Yeah. Well, then it must have been like, oh, we can't have this. Like, everyone's using kind of like 0.5 ml in a martini. It takes like 5,000 drinks to get through a bottle. So let's instruct them to stir it around the ice and dispose of it down the drain.
I'm a fan actually of having a bit more vermouth in a martini. I like a sort of 50-50, sometimes a reverse martini, which is more vermouth than gin. Obviously it depends on the vermouth and depends on the gin, and it depends on the day, and perhaps if it's a good day I might have a 5-1, and if it's a bad day maybe a 10-1. It changes, but that's the fun. I definitely don't subscribe to the one perfect recipe thing.
Do you think the dryness thing that happened historically maybe in some way kind of followed the zeitgeist of the time? So, like you say, you go sort of drier when it's a more stressful day. Do you think it's possible that, like, I don't know, wartime martinis had to be super, super dry?
Yeah.
Get to the point, all right? I've got a war office to get to.
This drink needs to hit the spot quickly. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no one knows for sure, do they, why this sort of cult of dryness took off? But I know Jared Brown and Anastasia Miller theorised that it was simply a wartime shortage of vermouth, and that was people making a virtue of that. But you definitely see, as you get to the middle of the 20th century, martinis get drier and drier and drier, and it becomes this kind of signifier of sort of intellect and kind of political strength to drink really dry martinis. And you have Roosevelt mixing martinis for Stalin in a kind of Cold War flex, and just this whole idea of it being really masculine.
Yeah, well, I think we had a similar thing occur like 10 or 15 years ago in London here, where everyone was doing really bitter cocktails. It was like loads of bitters in there, very sort of strong. Bitter sweet. The Negroni was obviously coming back in a really big way, but it was being done to all sorts of like brown cocktails. And everywhere you went, you were getting probably not cold enough, very, very strong, very bitter drinks. And everyone was expected to go, this is great, isn't it? But it was not exactly session cocktails. We'll get back to the show shortly, but first I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fever-Tree. I have been using Fever-Tree since 2006, when I opened the bar at Jamie Oliver's 15 restaurant in Cornwall, and right through to present day, where we still use Fever-Tree at Black Rock in East London. As a maker of drinks myself, I take very seriously the outsourcing of the sourcing of ingredients. But Fever-Tree are the brand that told us that if 3/4 of your drink is your mixer, you had damn well better pick the best one. Or words to that effect. Right now, it's Fever Tree Ginger Ale that I'm reaching for. Right now, it's Fever Tree Ginger Ale that I am reaching for. Right now, it's Fever Tree Ginger Ale that I am reaching for, which is the perfect foil to whiskey in a whiskey highball. A good ginger ale extends a whiskey out. It dumbs down the alcohol a little bit without muting the flavour of the scotch itself. Fever Tree know this, which is why they source their gingers from 3 distinct producing countries: India, the Ivory Coast, and Nigeria. Like blending whiskey, each ginger brings something to the table, combining together to offer aromatic intensity, a nice calm spice, and a long depth of finish. To learn more about Fever Tree, check out the links in the show notes. But now, let's get back to the show. So, just going back to the different components. So, what about glassware? Because obviously there's the iconic V-shaped martini glass, but how precious... What about... So can you have a martini on the rocks? Is that okay?
Yep, I've definitely got a martini on the rocks in my book. I like that, if you're getting dinner ready and you just want a kind of easygoing drink, I think a martini on the rocks is something I have a lot with, a few olives thrown in there. I like that a lot. But playing around with the glass, that's a huge part of it, isn't it? And I was really interested actually to learn about the history of the martini glass researching this book, because that was something I didn't know about it making its debut in 1925 at this big exposition in Paris, which was where Art Deco was supposedly born. And it was originally actually designed as a champagne glass. And it had these angular lines which were totally new and really captured this sort of really dynamic, engineered kind of new era in culture. And then it was co-opted by a similarly kind of dynamic, engineered, sort of uncompromising drink, the martini.
Nice. Yeah, because obviously before that, I guess everyone was serving them more in like coupes or Nick and Nora type wine glasses almost, right?
Well, I believe, according, to the Bible, which is the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, there's a whole section on glassware and the martini glass. Prior to that, cocktail glasses were more like wine glasses and were quite ornate. And then I think the Nick and Nora, I think it was sort of references the Thin Man, doesn't it? Is that sort of 30s type era. I love a coupe, a curvaceous coupe. My one bugbear is when glasses are too big, actually. And I'm really disappointed by the choice of glassware available more generally, to the general public. I think there are great trade retailers, sellers like John Jenkins or somewhere like that. But I think if you go into a gift shop or Oliver Bonus or somewhere like that, martini glasses are still these like massive fish
They're
bowls.
always huge, yeah.
In really gross colours as well, so you can't appreciate the kind of minimalism of the martini. And I like lots of little small martinis is much better.
Yeah, I get it. Do you think that's just because people are not mixing martinis at home in these huge like fishbowl like coupe martini glasses?
Well, I think it's because no one has really. People are not encouraged to ask themselves, like, why am I using a glass like this? Why does it have a stem? What is its purpose? And sort of once you think, yes, it needs a stem so that I'm not touching the drink, or it needs to be small so that I have a cold drink and I drink it quickly rather, cocktails in their very early days were very small, weren't they? Almost tiny. Shot sized. Having said that, at my launch party, we had stemless glasses, to be fair, but they were very nice ones. They were Y-shaped.
They were, and it was at Rules, so
yes.
What more can you ask for?
Yeah.
That's a great place to hold. I mean, I guess you're spoiled for choice in London, because you could have done Dukes and Rules and Connaught and all this kind of stuff, but such a great bar.
Yeah, and I liked Rules because I've never been to a party there, and I had always sort of harboured this ambition to have a party there. And also I love Brian Silva, who up until very recently was running the bar. He's this kind of gravel voiced Bostonian, kind of your dream of a bartender, and he's taught me so much about the mixed drink. So.
When I first moved to London about 15 years ago, Brian was behind the bar there, and I remember a couple of nights out going and sitting at the bar at Rules, and in my experience, but your launch party was by far the busiest I've ever seen it there, and I expect anyone who was there would agree it was the busiest I've ever seen. It was a good turnout, but I remember going there many times with friends, and it would just be 3 of us, 4 of us. We'd sit at the bar, and I don't ever recall ever seeing a menu. Brian would just stand there and start making things for you.
Yeah.
And as the conversation flowed, he would make different things, just incredible. And I actually haven't had a drink made by him for ages, but I distinctly remember thinking, this is the best bartender I've ever seen in my life, or best mixologist anyway, because of his ability to just grab ingredients and mix stuff that you'd never tasted before.
Totally, but he's also not a snob, and he loves things like a glacé cherry, and Southern Comfort is another thing he's always sticking up for. I love that, yeah. And he would never ever say, do you want to come and see my lab?
Yeah. No, he will not.
Because he doesn't have one.
No. The lab is there, right in front of him.
Yeah.
In his head. Yeah. The ingredient his Swedish punch was the one that he always used to. You know that Swedish punch?
Refresh my memory. What's in a Swedish punch?
It's not a cocktail. It's a product.
Component.
It's something like I think it's like an agricole rum.
Yeah.
But made in Sweden.
And how would he use it?
Well, he'd use it as a rum replacement,
Yeah.
but in all sorts of drinks. It's a clear spirit, so unaged, although aged versions may well exist. And he would mix it into, I guess, kind of sour style drinks, probably straight up stuff as well. And it had that kind of agricole-y, wild. I always get slightly plasticky note off agricole in a very endearing way, and it had all of that, and I'd just never even seen it before, and he introduced it to us. Yeah,
he was really into sort of vermouth and Negronis, I think, ahead of the curve as well, wasn't he?
I think he was ahead of everything. Because he had, and there's something. I don't want to be like ageist, but there's something about an older bartender, and there's a few of them, of course, knocking around in London who've been at it for years, and there's just a kind of. It's not confidence exactly, but a kind of wisdom, and that feels great as a customer, because you feel like, I guess it's just simply because he's a generation older than me. It's like a parent figure.
Well, I say in my book, when I go and see him, I feel like I'm in a safe pair of hands.
Yeah. I love that. I just love some of the older guys like Alessandro at Duke's and so on. It's nice. Speaking of Duke's, the martinis there are legendary.
Yes.
I don't know how much gin they put in those things these days.
120 mils.
120. So about twice as much as you'd probably normally.
Yeah, about 5 shots or something like that.
I mean, were you there doing research for your book?
I've definitely been there more
Enough
times than I can remember, but as those words come out of my mouth, I think, well, yeah, that's probably because you can't remember that you went after you've had a couple of Duke's martinis. But yeah, it's just part of the repertoire of any martini lover, I think, to go to Duke.
Yeah, and at 120 mil, that one, I think they're still under £25 there, aren't they? So it's actually not
They're
bad
good value.
Yeah. But you did an FT piece not so long ago, didn't you, about how expensive martinis
The
have got?
Martini Index, yeah. And at one point, it was the most liked story on the FT's social media. So it was quite interesting that obviously FT readers love martinis and discussions of price. Yes, I did, because it was sort of fascinating to me how martinis, there just seemed to be no ceiling on price, really, that you can charge for a martini if you're the right kind of bar.
Yeah.
And also, what's interesting is that a lot of these martinis are being made with ingredients that really aren't particularly exceptional, that you could buy in a shop, and you could mix that martini yourself at home. So what are you paying for? And that's the kind of interesting question.
Well, what's the answer to that question exactly? What do you think the answer is?
Yeah, well, I think, take the Connaught, obviously, is a classic example of that. All of that sort of ritual around it, having the trolley come to your table, being given your little sort of amuse-bouche cocktail before the main event, that feeling that you're in a special place, that you're lucky to have got a table in the first place. And then also the fact that they sort of personalise it a little bit, so you get to make these choices with, what gin, what garnish, or vodka, what bitters you're going to have. So the whole experience, the serving of it, takes about 10 minutes, doesn't it?
It does. And you do actually feel like you're getting a proper show there with the lemon zest technique. I don't even know exactly what they call that, ninja lemon zesting or something.
Yeah, actually, Ago trained me in it. So I have actually got video footage of myself doing it the one time in my life, probably, that I will ever manage to do it. That was quite hairy. I was terrified I was going to drop the mixing glass and smash all the lovely rich breaded glass.
Yeah, just thousands of pounds worth of damage done in one fell swoop. I've got a bit of a thing about lemon zest with martinis. So I actually have been in the habit of late of requesting my martinis with no garnish at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a lot of damage that can be done with a lemon zest. Not quite thousands of pounds worth of Connaught equipment damage, but if I've had too many martinis where the flavour of the gin has just been kind of snuffed out by over zesting of lemon.
Yes.
And so it tastes like lemon. And
yes,
you know, when you learn about gin distilleries and learn about all the kind of balancing and trials that go into getting all these botanicals just right, and then I feel like the bartender is the sort of second distiller, and they have the opportunity to very much upset the apple cart with all of that, and so I've just gotten into the habit of saying, I'll just leave it, I'm fine, because I want to taste the gin
and the vermouth, potentially.
Yeah.
I might try that next time.
Maybe for your reissue when you do the second edition of the book.
No garnish.
Put Stevenson's no garnish martini. One less ingredient to think about. But no, I like an olive because the little bit of saline in there, the salt that comes with the olive is really nice. And most drinks benefit from a little bit of salt, I think.
100%. I mean, it depends a lot on the character of the gin, doesn't it, as well? Because some are very citrusy in their own right anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
So,
What do you think? You mentioned a few sort of historical martini drinkers in the book, the likes of Hemingway, Roosevelt, you already mentioned. What do you think, if anything, their martini preferences say about their personality? Maybe let's run through some of them. So Hemingway was a frozen onion.
Yeah, so he was very, very prescriptive about how he liked his martini, super, super dry, garnished with little pickled onions, pearl skin onions from the freezer, minus 15 degrees. But sometimes he would just garnish his martini with fresh onion, thinly sliced, which I did try for the book in the name of research. I had hoped that I might, discover this was really amazing, but I didn't like it. But there is actually a spring onion martini in there by Sasha Petraska called the Spring Forward, which is meant to be made with ramps, which is kind of like a spring onion. And that is actually nice, as long as your date has one too,
And is that a garnish or is that an ingredient in the drink?
You just very lightly kind of barely even muddle it. I would say, just like crush it.
Well, that's along the same lines then, isn't it? I wonder, was he aware of Hemingway's onion?
I don't know.
Fondness?
But Georgette, his wife, she spoke to me about the drink for the book and told a lovely story about how he had created this drink for the John Dory Oyster Bar in New York and didn't want to take any payment for it and insisted he be paid in oysters instead. So she said they then had to get through like 100 oysters a week to make this a fair deal. And she said they would sit at the bar with their knees touching, reading their books and drinking these spring forward martinis and eating oysters together. And I thought that was such a lovely image.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what about other people? I always thought James Bond. I always thought that's a clever one, right? Shaken, not stirred, because it sort of describes what happens to him, right? He's like knocked around, but it's not affected him too much. That's the way I always read it anyway.
Oh, okay, interesting.
You ever thought about that?
Yeah, well, I suppose that does make sense, doesn't it? I mean, I heard that it was a case of Ian Fleming wanting to cast Bond. Ian Fleming being a big martini aficionado and knowing that Shaken Not Stirred was sort of out of step with the times, but he deliberately wanted to cast James Bond as kind of a rebel who didn't care about the rules, and so that's why he.
Hence the vodka
shaken.
as well.
Yeah,
obviously more in the movies than the books. Yeah, I read that Fleming was working in Berlin as a journalist, and there was a bar that he frequented there where the bartender was known to make martinis shaken, and that was where he first encountered it. I mean, this is possible that's not true, but certainly I've read it. There's also, I don't know if you've seen it, there was a really great article he wrote for a travel magazine where he was describing about ordering martinis in in the UK because he thought it was pretty hard to get a good martini in the UK.
Yeah.
And he had this strategy because this might explain why he found it was hard, because he was going in pubs. But what he would do is he'd go into the pub, he'd walk up to the bar, and in his own words, as if like very confident, like walking up to the bar, very confident, and he would ask for a glass. He'd get the bartender to pour 5 shots of gin over a load of ice and put a splash of or vodka over ice, and then a splash of vermouth in there, and stir it really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And basically, bartenders often would just sort of rabbit in headlights, like, okay, I'm going to do whatever you say, and he would kind of get the drink he wanted.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, you see, this is the great thing about the martini is every story, you can delve into it, and there's lots of different versions.
There's tons of them, aren't there? Yeah. What was the other one I saw? Oppenheimer.
Yes.
I didn't know he was a martini drinker.
Yeah, and he had this very, he liked them rimmed with, what was it, honey and lemon juice or something like that.
Have you tried
weird.
it? Sounds
Yeah, I did try it. It was kind of nice enough. I mean, I have never asked for one or made myself one again. But I think kind of stickiness shouldn't go with a martini, ultimately.
It should be sort of oily and clean and crisp, right?
Yeah.
It should be light. I mean, maybe honey and lemon would be good if you're like feeling a bit unwell. Like the one that you have with flu when you're in bed,
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
sip on that. The martini your mother would make you. But I like. There's another. I think it was Dick Bradshaw said a martini should taste like the most delicious water, and I always really like that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that one.
It's a good one. See, this is when we do the second edition, or you do the second edition of the book. Got to get that one in there as well.
Well, he's in the. Dick is in there not just with the Espresso Martini, but also with his comment about the Gibson, which is the Gibson is thought to have been named after this illustrator called Gibson, who drew these very curvaceous, booby kind of women. And apparently, Dick Bradshaw said that you should always garnish your Gibson with 2 pickled onions. In honour of the beautiful curvaceous women that he drew.
Perfect. So you mentioned Espresso Martini. So that is in the book as well, isn't it?
Yes.
But with sort of caveats and things. So when is a martini not on a martini?
Yeah. Well, I think the Espresso Martini is the one sort of... I've classed those drinks in a chapter called Honorary Martinis, and I think the Espresso Martini is the one martini twist that I think really has entered the sort of classic... what would you say, sort of Hall of Fame of martinis.
Yeah.
I actually wrote the entry for it for the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, so that was interesting to get the facts on that one. But actually, another twist that I've really come round to is the lychee martini, actually, and I'm getting a sense that maybe it's having a little bit of a comeback.
Have you been writing about it? Is that why?
I haven't yet, actually, but with the whole sort of 90s Oasis the revival that we're seeing at the moment, I feel like the lychee martini is due a revival, but in a tasteful way. Yeah. And there's a nice twist by an American bartender in there as well called the Suit and Tie, which is a little bit of sherry as well as a little bit of lychee liqueur as well, and that's really, really good, as you can imagine, because you get the
I can imagine that working very well.
That's yum.
I think with the espresso, in defense of the Espresso Martini, if we're going to like kind of steel man it, so vermouth is sort of sweet, sort of bitter, and aromatic. Coffee, sort of sweet, sort of bitter, sort of aromatic. We're not a million miles up. There's no alcohol in the coffee, of course. I suppose some people put coffee liqueur in there, but you're not too far away. It would be a sort of wetter than a standard martini, but it is tasty, and
it's extremely efficacious. It's like a functional drink, isn't it? Which is part of the martini's personality, I think. So it's a kind of, well, not a full stop, a starting gun kind of cocktail, isn't it?
Yeah. So you did a guest shift at Quo Vadis recently.
I don't even quite call it a guest shift, but they said, "Oh, do you want to come down and mix some martinis in our martini happy hour?" And I said, "Brilliant!" And thought, I'll just stand at the end of the bar, mix a couple of drinks, and sign a few bits, and it'd be great. And shitloads of people came down, and they had the busiest martini hour they've ever had. And yeah, I was mixing martinis absolutely non-stop. It was exhausting.
How are you as a bartender? Are you? I mean, presumably you make cocktails at home quite a lot, but are you well versed behind? Have you ever been a bartender?
I've never been a bartender. I've worked in a pub, which I think should be national service. I think everyone should have to do that, because it's very humbling when you realise how hard it is, even just to pull pints or do rum and coke or whatever. So I have worked a bit behind the bar, and I definitely have a lot of respect for people who do. And I think I can make a good drink. I sort of don't doubt my abilities to do that, but definitely when you're having to bang out kind of martinis non-stop and you've got like 5 glasses lined up in front of you sort of waiting to go, that's a whole different ball game. And I think I did a respectable job, but what I think though is really key to being a bartender is not really the ability to make drinks, because actually making classic cocktails is really pretty easy if you just observe the rules for what makes a good drink. It's about being a host and really being behind the bar, mixing the drinks, chatting to people, keeping an eye on like who's next in the queue, dealing with someone who's getting a bit restless over there. Someone else wants their drink a bit differently. Then the boss came in and he said, I've got my goddaughter here and I want you to make me the Flame of Love martini you talk about in your book, which was a totally different martini from what I was meant to be making that night, which was made with vodka, a sherry rinse, 3 flamed orange twists. So suddenly, like with all of these people waiting there, I've got to go and find vodka, sherry, matches, orange, like, and do this whole kind of drink to keep the boss happy with all of these people waiting for their martinis. And that is really what makes a good bartender, I think, is the ability to do it all at once. To
kind of pivot, yeah.
And potentially take the money as well. Thank God I wasn't
Yes.
going to do that. Otherwise, I would have burst into tears, I think.
Just reminded me of that. Father of the Bride, the original one with Spencer Tracy.
Yeah.
And there's this great scene in it where they're having a engagement party, and there's guests coming over for the party, and he is dead set on making martinis for everyone, and he's in the kitchen table stirring his martinis, and it's a fantastic scene where all these guests are arriving and like handing him coats, and he's trying to stir these drinks and measure stuff and everything, and then he's like, oh, I've got martinis, what, can I get you one? And they're like, oh no, I'll have a whiskey and soda. Oh no, I'll have a beer. Oh, I'll have a glass of wine. And he's mixing these martinis and then also having to then prepare other drinks for people in his head. And it's just it's an absolute like masterclass in acting, because he's having to sort of multitask these drinks but also play the role of this father of the bride all at the same time. And he actually does if you watch closely, he does a really good job of mixing these martinis. Like he's putting everything, he's measuring correctly, he's putting the right amount of ice, he's stirring, he's pouring, he's garnishing correctly. It's absolutely incredible. But it is interesting, like the home bartender versus professional and the differences between the two.
Oh yeah, and also a great bartender, that ability to read the guest, I think, and adapt your style to different people. I think the real skill in being a bartender lies in service.
Cleaning as you go as well is another thing, I think.
Yes.
Which, I mean, everyone.
I was definitely quite messy.
But like anyone I know who makes cocktails at home, including me, like if I have to make 3 cocktails, the kitchen looks like a bomb's hit afterwards, because I'm just not used to that kind of, you don't sort of tidy up as you go in the same way as you do when you're on shift. It's, when you're behind a bar, it's like a military operation. Everything has to have protocols and clean and space and all that kind of stuff and cleaning. At home, you kind of take liberties with all of that, and thus it looks like a mess by the time you're done.
And then also being able to think on your feet, because so many people turned up, they didn't have enough glasses in the freezer. So then you've got to kind of like work out while you're mixing the drink and talking to someone, and your brain is also thinking, what am I going to do about like the next, and you're trying to get glasses in whilst mixing things. You've got to see the problems coming down the line,
It is the classic duck floating on the water thing with the legs going underneath. You're like, just smiling at the person thinking, I've got 5 other things I need to be doing right now, and just sort of grin like maniacally.
I like the idea of you mixing cocktails at home. What would you make if people came around?
That's a good question. Certainly we make margaritas, because I have quite a lot of mezcal and tequila at home at the moment, so I've got to get through it.
I had a house party in the summer and we made palomas, but actually, having thought, that would be such an easy drink, actually, sort of like opening all the bottles and being grateful and everything, actually, I regretted that. I hadn't anticipated how much people were going to like them as well and how quickly they were going to keep wanting more. So I should have pre-batched.
Well, this is it. I always say to people who are having parties and asking like, "Oh, what cocktail should I make?" Is like, just do as much as you can in advance, because when people come over, I know you want to kind of do the showmanship and be, you know, mixing everything, but make life easy for yourself.
Do a punch.
Do a punch.
100%.
Yeah, because it's going to be hard enough as it is just to, you know, talk to your guest and serve them drinks. So batch it up, stick it in the freezer or the fridge, depending on what it is.
Totally.
And then,
well, like that, and I've got a freezer martini in the book to Liam Davey of Hawksmoor specification, because I thought, you know, they do 1,000 martinis a week or something ridiculous. So.
Do you think it takes something away at all from the kind of the occasion of the drink by having, and this isn't necessarily martini specific, but just batching
pre-batched drinks? You probably couldn't. It depends on the kind of bar you are, doesn't it? So you couldn't charge £35 and give someone just something poured out of a bottle, could you? I think people would feel shortchanged. But then there are other types of bars where you just want something that tastes great quickly, and you know, and it solves the problem of, as well, of, you know, staffing is really difficult, and making sure that everyone's got the skill set. It solves that problem.
Consistency as well is another thing, you know. It's going to be the same every time. Tested prior to service. Don't have to taste every single drink. You know. Yeah, there's definitely some benefits to it, but it does kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the £25 martini. It's like, what are you actually there for? And in some ways, I feel like the drink, and especially when it's a martini, is sort of the enabler of the occasion rather than the purpose.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was also thinking on the way here about also it's this sort of meeting point between the bar brings the ritual to it, and then the, you know, customer, the guest brings they personalise the drink, and so there's this lovely meeting in the middle of both halves. You know?
And then when you put it like that, it seems like it's worth £25 a glass, doesn't it? Even though it costs like £3 a glass to put together or whatever.
I would definitely prefer to have one amazing cocktail actually than go out for some massive tasting menu dinner or something. Yeah,
for sure. It's I don't know, because we can make these drinks at home for so little, there must be something in that experience of having it in the bar, beyond like the Connaught, where clearly there's a massive theatre component to it. You know, there's other great bars around London where you might not see the drink being made. It might just be brought to your table, and we're still paying sort of £15-20 for that cocktail. And yet, obviously, there's a lot of people that still see the value in that. You know, having someone else put that drink together for them in that place.
Yeah. I think good bars and restaurants, you walk into them and there's this feeling straight away as you walk in of some kind of weight being lifted from your shoulders, you know, and that's what a good place creates in you, I think. Yeah.
So I'd love to talk to you a little about writing the book and your process. How does that look, and how does it compare to, say, if you're writing an article for a newspaper?
So writing books. So I suppose with the Martini, one of the challenges is in a way, although I still did lots of research for it, and obviously trialing all the recipes and everything, it's a subject that I already know quite well, and I think that can almost sometimes be harder to write about something that you know quite well, is to sort of zoom back out and find a sort of fresh way through the material. But it was a real joy to do as well. I think whether I'm writing books or articles, the reader is always at the forefront of my mind. I have a kind of reader in my mind, and I'm very aware that I'm competing for their attention with a lot of other stuff. So I'm always thinking, like, what is going to grab their attention? What don't they understand? You know, am I being boring or too obscure or that kind of thing? And I think that's quite important to creating a sort of conversational, engaging book. I mean, at the end of the day, I definitely feel that I'm a journalist first and foremost. And there's a nice distinction that A.A. Gill made about the difference between a writer and a journalist is a journalist never gets writer's block. So at the end of the day, I still have to meet my deadline. So, whether it's a book or a column. So there's a limit to how. I mean, I'm an incredibly slow writer and I rewrite loads, and I'm sure I drive my publisher crazy because I do loads of edits and rewrites at different proofing stages. But at the same time, you've got to get that thing out the door in the end. And I think that's quite important to maybe stops one getting overindulgent.
So you would, in terms of your sort of writing process, it's a case of getting a load of text down and then going back over and refining over and over again? Or do you feel like you can kind of, being a journalist, because this is how I imagine journalists work, I have no kind of experience being a journalist, or you can just sort of write paragraph after paragraph, know the structure, pretty much get it bang on first time?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got your sort of hard news journalist, and they definitely, because I did go to journalism school briefly, and you definitely learn there's a format for like the way that you order your information in the article, literally according to an order which in the olden days the person who edits it would just be able to cut from the bottom, leaving the most important stuff at the top.
Really?
So it's sort of descending order of importance. There we go. So that's kind of how you approach hard news, whereas I write sort of more like lifestyle-y stuff, I suppose. So although some of the rules still apply, like the incredibly rigorous fact-checking at the FT, your data's got to be sound. Like you've also got to approach, even if you're writing about something sort of quite fluffy like blue, or incredibly fluffy like blue cocktails or something, always in the back of your mind is sort of, what is this story telling me about like the bigger picture? Why are people into this right now? What am I learning from this? You need to apply those things to it, even if it seems quite sort of superficial in that way. So I suppose I apply those rules to my journalism, but also to my books as well. And
with the journalism, have you kind of got carte blanche, like creative freedom to just write about whatever you want at this point?
No, I still have to pitch every idea for every column I write and every article I do to my editor, my section editor. I think, so it's a dialogue. And when you've been working with an editor or just been a journalist for a long time, you refine your sense of what they're going to like and what they're not going to like. And quite often something will come up and I'll just think like, oh God, she'll so like this. So your success rate with pitching gets better and better, but it's definitely not always the case that something can go ahead. So.
And where do you find the subject matter, the inspiration for it? Does it come from all places?
Well, I think something that's moaned about increasingly in journalism, certainly by the old guard, is that journalism is getting more and more desk-based and Google-based. Whereas in the old days, if you were at your desk, you weren't doing your job because you were meant to be out there finding the stories. And I definitely find, although something like Instagram is really interesting and useful resource, you really cannot beat still going out and seeing people. And often that's where the best and most original ideas come from. And I think there's a danger, particularly with sort of younger generation writers, that they're not just getting out there and going to stuff and sniffing around for those more original stories. It's
not exactly a nightmare either, is it? You're going to be at bars or at distilleries or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You're not having to go to sort of reinforced concrete conference or something like that.
Yeah, it's not like your specialist field is like waste disposal.
Yeah. I know, so it can be hard convincing people that it's a job as well.
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah. You were part of the founding team at Imbibe.
Yes.
Imbibe Magazine, which was 2005?
Oh, God, I don't know. That sounds about right. Yeah.
What was that like?
It was a really exciting time. So I'd been on Wine and Spirit International before that, which was very tradey magazine. That was where I sort of cut my teeth. And then Imbibe, I think, though, was kind of new in that it was bringing together wine and cocktail culture in one magazine in a much more sort of colourful, personality-driven way. And Chris Losh, the founding editor, has, in absolutely the best way, quite a tabloid sensibility, which made it kind of fun and mischievous as well, you know. Loves a cheesy headline, but is also definitely a proper journalist too. So it was very exciting to be part of that, because I think that also reflected how the industry was changing and has changed, is that wine and spirits have come much closer together. And it's certainly what I like doing, which is I write about all types of drinks, which is quite unusual. But I enjoy that because I think both have things to learn from each other.
Yeah. So do you think actually being part of Imbibe at the start has sort of steered you, or even maybe like validated this sort of potential to do both wine and cocktails in your present day journalism?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, initially I was much more of a spirit specialist, because when I started on Wine and Spirit International, my first job, which was just around the corner from here, actually, it was just when the whole sort of bar scene was really starting to take off in Shoreditch. And I was kind of young and single and just kind of up for doing anything. And no one was really writing about the bar scene that much apart from Simon Difford. And so, you know, they said, well, can you go out and go to these bars and write about it? So, you know, right place, right time a bit there. And I was just sort of up for going and exploring the subject. Fell in love with that, but then, you know, Imbibe exposed me more to wine. And then when I started writing on the FT, it was actually the wine editor, the wine columnist on my part of the paper left. And my editor actually said to me, I'm really trying to find someone who can do the wine stuff in the way that I want it done. Can you recommend anybody? And I thought and made suggestions, and I suddenly thought, maybe I should just have a go. And that was a like uncharacteristically bold moment for me, where I was just like, I'll give it a go. And amazingly, she gave me lots of opportunities. And that was ages ago now, and it was a steep learning curve, and continues to be. But nice. I love writing about wine as well.
Yeah, I always thought with Imbibe, it's a trade magazine, and the combination of wine and spirits and cocktails and beer, I suppose, as well. I never kind of, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I just always thought there was something slightly jarring about it, because it feels to me like cocktail people are in their kind of thing, and obviously there are exceptions. You know, for example, bars where you've got a good wine offering, like restaurants and things like that. But a lot of cocktail people are kind of in their cocktail groove, and then wine people, sommeliers, in my experience, don't have a lot of time for cocktails.
Yeah.
And so you've got two quite different cohorts.
Yeah. Reading
the same publication potentially, or not, and actually just reading one that's about cocktails and one that's about wine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately, I never had to drill down into the sort of commercial side of things, so I don't know whether it worked or not. But I was the person who came up with the idea for this competition that we did called Bartenders versus Sommeliers, which like pitted the two against each other, and they had to sort of perform in each other's specialisms, which was really fun and extremely competitive for many years. So it definitely created some entertainment, if nothing else.
Do you remember what the first edition then of Imbibe? Do you remember what was on the front cover, or any of the features, or anything you wrote?
Oh God.
Sorry, I should have prepared you for that one.
What I do remember is that some things that we did start writing about, which now feel very mainstream, but at the time still felt very new. Japanese whiskey was one. And that was definitely still very early in the day for Japanese whiskey on the international stage. And then also Non-Alc as well. And I remember people like Ryan Chetty, starting to do interesting non-alc cocktails and writing about that.
That's fascinating. You were writing about non-alc back then. There weren't obviously any, this was, I guess, mocktails, stroke virgin cocktails or whatever. There was no non-alc products in that whole category didn't exist.
But he was definitely one of the first, I think, to really start doing that. So when people say, it all began with Sea Lip, I often say, I mean, no disrespect to Ben Branson, but like, I remember the most creative bartenders were some of the first to strike out into non-alc.
Yeah, well, there was always a pressure to have 10% of your list maybe as non-alc cocktails. So,
Yeah.
and if you were a good bar, then you had to get a bit more creative
Yeah.
than, apple juice with some mint in it or whatever,
Yeah.
and a bit of soda.
Yeah.
So there was always that, but I think although it was obviously appreciated by people who weren't drinking, it never kind of captured people's attention in the same way as alcohol cocktails did at that time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But I think now, actually, when I go into a bar for the first time, one of the acid tests for me of whether a bar is good is I'll turn to the non-alc section to see what they're doing there,
Yeah.
and I often have one because I think, you can't really hide behind a non-alc
Yeah, sure.
cocktail,
And
so.
the best places are doing cool stuff, right? I mean, Noma do a whole non-alc tasting flight alongside their food now, don't they? Which allegedly is better than the wine pairing.
Well, they were really early adopters of doing sort of juice and tea, weren't
That's
they?
it.
And actually, I was judging this week. I was very lucky to be a guest judge in the Leafies International Tea Awards this week. So I've got a real sort of burgeoning interest in tea.
Tell me about that. So what's the awards?
They're called the Leafies. So it's an international tea competition in collaboration with Fortnum & Mason. And this is their third year. And I was just asked along, really, I think, as a sort of guest judge. And, I'm writing about the experience. So I was given a bit of tea training in advance. I mean, I've done a fair bit of tasting with specialists like Postcard Teas and Rare Tea Company before, who many people in the audience probably know already. But this was another level. I was with a judging panel. We had somebody who came from a tea picking family in Taiwan. There were Sri Lankan tea brokers. We had the tea ambassador for Japan there. So we had people from all over the world with all kinds, somebody from India. So people with all these different specialisms. And what was fascinating to me is the way you judge tea. You don't just judge the end product, the brewed tea. It comes to the table on a tray. It's brewed by someone else according to the instructions of the
On the back of the pack.
seller. Yeah, exactly. Comes on a little tray, and you have the dry tea in a dish. Then you have the wet tea leaves on a sort of upturned lid of a teapot. And then you have the brewed tea in a white bowl as well. So you're judging on lots of different criteria. You're looking at the tea leaves, first of all, to see are they evenly picked? How have they been rolled? Is the colour even? Because that will tell you about how it's been cooked in the wok or whatever. Then you're looking at the wet tea leaves. You unroll them to see what the leaves look like, smell them. Then you're looking at the tea, like what's the colour like? Does it have a sort of gold ring around the edge, which is much sought after? And then you smell it and you taste it and sort of judge it more like you would a wine or something like that. But what's interesting, therefore, with tea is that unlike any other drink I can immediately think of, you're looking at the raw material very closely and how that has been harvested and prepared, as well as the end product. So it's this completely sort of 360 kind of or immersive experience appreciating tea and seeing. And with the matcha tea, you put the green powder on a piece of paper, and then the Japanese tea ambassador got a spatula, and then she draws it out on lines on the paper so that you're looking at the fineness of the grain and the colour. And so once you start looking, each one matches kind of blue-green, another one's more olive-green, less desirable, and so on. So the colour, the aroma, the texture, like the detail was amazing.
But that is amazing. So you're kind of assessing the drink on its own merits, as well as the skill of the producer, the growing of the tea itself, picker, all of it.
So the Taiwanese picker, or who came from a picking family, she was holding them up and going, now this is a great example. And so you're really zooming in on that moment when someone picked it. Did they pick it well enough?
But does the sort of physical appearance always correlate with great tasting tea, or are the two independent of one another? So you could have brilliant processing.
Beautiful looking tea.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely had ones that looked great, were disappointing, on the palate. But if you have uneven preparation of the tea leaves, for example, that's going to show through in the taste, from what I learned from these experts. So it was amazing. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Fascinating.
So I love stuff like that where you're like, oh, there's a whole thing going on here, that we don't know about. And
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And also a lot of what they were doing, assessing the tea, was sort of drew on frameworks that I'm kind of familiar with, discussion of terroir or finish or mouthfeel or things like that. But it was a different vocabulary and and people. I didn't know any of the people either, which was really interesting. I was also as high as a kite after all that tea afterwards.
The caffeine, yeah.
They slurp incredibly loudly, so like this, and then much more than wine tasters. And they said they sometimes spit, but not always.
Yeah, I had a rare. I don't very often drink green tea, and not because I don't like it, but I just I recognise it does need some respect in its preparation and everything. And I'm happy to give that to coffee first thing in the morning, but later in the day, not so much. And I made myself a cup of green tea in the evening, and I think I got the dose wrong, and I couldn't get sleep. I just could not get sleep. I was awake till like 2 a.m, and I'm normally sort of asleep by 10 o'clock these days. Shock horror. I thought it was a bartender. And I was like, wow, that's potent stuff. And it got me thinking, actually. It's like everyone always associates caffeine with coffee. But I reckon I would have slept quicker on a cup of coffee than that cup of tea. And of course, there was far less tea by weight in my cup of tea than there would have been coffee in a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So it's potent stuff.
Yeah, green tea is very, very potent. And it's often offered as the sort of decaf option. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
But I'm told, don't quote me on this, that green tea lacks something in regular black tea, lacks something that makes you feel kind of wired. So you feel kind of high, but not jittery.
Got you.
But anyway, don't quote me on that.
So there's like
I like that idea.
There's the caffeine plus like a mild sedative at the same time.
Or something like that. I don't know. You're just very lucid.
Yeah. All right. Maybe I just need to start drinking it in the morning. So I was just thinking about tea then. Actually, I for about 3 weeks I was an expert in tea, and this was going back some years now, maybe about 15 years ago. We one of the first consultancy jobs myself and Tom, my business partner, got was out in Azerbaijan, and it was a big, expensive restaurant build that had this kind of sort of Pan-Asian theme to it, and they spent an absolute fortune on this place. It's like 250 covers. Think sort of like Zuma, but in Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. Really, really high level. And one of the things they wanted was a tea station, and they had this incredible sink unit built that was right in the middle of the restaurant, and then all this shelving and these incredible pots of tea, something like 40 different teas. Anyway, we were doing consultancy for the cocktail menu, and as the sort of job went on, they kind of asked, well, can you do the coffee training, because I've got a background in coffee, and they were like, oh, can you do the tea training as well? I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. So anyway, I bought every tea book available and read them all, and then a bit of online research at the time, although this was a while ago and it was harder to find that kind of stuff then, and managed to sort of just about balance this knowledge in my brain for long enough to be able to train the staff on 40 different teas.
Wow.
Yeah, some of them were like fruit flavored ones, but there was a lot of different green teas and white teas and all sorts, black teas as well. And then, I think I probably lost the knowledge of it all fairly shortly after that.
No, there's a lot to learn. But one of the tea importers was saying to me that they're now seeing a real boom in kind of high-end places wanting to invest in their tea offering. And she was saying, they were supplying to places like the Emery and stuff, and just saying, a lot of these places are just saying, like, price no object, we just want the best tea, the rarest tea, whatever.
And you can pay quite a lot of money, can't you?
Yeah.
So when you were drinking it for the competition, do you drink it like the first brew, the second brew, the third brew, or how does that work?
So definitely, like, good teas can go more than one brew. On the whole, we just did one brew, but there were a couple where we tried it, and I think this is very nice. They gave it the benefit of the doubt and said, I think this would be better on a second brew. So actually they got a second crack at the whip, some teas. So
that's weird, isn't it? The way that the second one can taste better. It's like it's removing a tannin or something from the first flush.
Yeah.
And then that allows you to sort of access more subtle notes in the second one, something like that, I suppose.
Yeah. It definitely evolves over.
Yeah. Just going back to non-alc, because you've written quite a lot about non-alc, and you've got your finger on the pulse of all of that. Where are we at with this at the moment? There's been a few new launches recently, and obviously sales and investments in non-alc. So how do you see the category at the moment with non-alc spirits and maybe wine as well?
Well, it's definitely one of the drinks categories I find the most interesting to write about at the moment from a journalistic point of view. Although I think still you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find a good non-alc product. And there are a lot of very cynical products out there, I think, as part of this gold rush that's going on at the moment, which make me mad, quite frankly. But yeah, so journalistically, it's very interesting. So much innovation going on. I love the fact as well that it's a category really because it's such a new territory. There is no sort of real framework for I don't know. There's no snobbery. There's no classification. There's very little sort of
dogma.
Definitions. No baggage. Exactly, in a way that wine can have in great ways, but can also be quite sort of stymied by it, I think. So I think it's very exciting in that way. So where is it at the moment? I mean, there are a few products that I think some of the best products, and I say this having judged the World Alcohol Free Awards a couple of years running now, and also just tasting all the time. I think a lot of the best products are actually the ones that really aren't trying to be a proxy, but are just being a sort of great tasting non-alcoholic drink in their own right. So something like Bativo, which is apple cider, honey and botanicals, which is a sort of bittersweet aperitif. I think that's fantastic and really stands on its own 2 feet, I'd love to see more products like that, and I hope that's where it's going. But I realise a lot of people who are looking for non-alc are just looking for a sort of fake G&T.
Yeah, it feels to me like the best ones are the ones where the flavour takes it away from like a soft drink, and usually I think it's bitterness, like a bit of bitterness in there makes it feel more adult, and obviously you draw comparisons to Italian aperitivos or aperitivi, I should say, and therefore it feels like it's an acquired taste. It has a challenging component to it, and of course you can then start mixing drinks. So those formulas, it's soda water or whatever, and
you can sort of savor it a bit more.
Slows you down as well when it's bitter, doesn't it?
Yeah. So and in Italy and a bit in France as well, they already have a sort of culture of bittersweet non-alc drinks. I discovered non-alc Suze in France when I was there recently.
Oh, really?
Have you had that?
No.
It comes in like a brown beer bottle with a really cool label in that kind of Suze font. I just thought, why is this not all over Instagram? It's so cool.
It's cool branding, Suze, as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
really
exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
So I love that. I drink a lot of non-alc beer as well.
The most non-alc stuff I drink is non-alc beer.
Yeah.
I think it's the state of that category is fantastic. In fact, in some ways, I prefer non-alc beer to alc beer now. It's just so refreshing.
Yeah.
There's so many breweries doing it. It's so it's a big market where you can choose. It's still a bit more expensive than I like it to be, but then again, I expect there's quite a lot of process involved in it, much the same as making a normal beer.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of that. What about wine? We just why do you think wine is so challenging to sort of simulate in the non-alc space?
Yeah, well, we know, don't we, that once you take alcohol out of the equation, you're changing a lot about the kind of texture and sort of length of flavour, aren't you, and kind of structure of the drink. But why can people do it in beer and not wine? So we've tasted. You definitely get some cool kind of natural winemakers who do grape juices, which are nice but still quite sweet. That's the problem, isn't it? I think once you take the alcohol out, wine is just really sweet. I haven't found one. I found some great like half strength wines.
Right.
I wrote about that recently.
And how are they making those? Is it going through a normal fermentation, but like with lower amounts of sugar initially, so it produces less alcohol? Is that...
There are different ways you can do it. So you can make it to ferment to full strength and then de-alcoholize it.
Yeah.
Or you could blend non-alc and alc, which I think is what this brand, I can't remember their name, but they're a German company. If you Google ft.com half strength wine or something like that, will come up. But they were great. They're 6% wines. What's the other? What have I said? So there's osmosis, blending.
De-alkalize, blend with something.
The way you farm your grapes.
Yeah.
You can actually pick at a lower sugar content, so you naturally get a lower strength wine. But I think, and some wines can go right down to like 9% or something naturally. So, so we were talking about non-alc beer. I know there is a sort of culture, isn't there, amongst runners of non-alc beer as almost like an isotonic drink. Is that right?
Claimed isotonic, right? But
okay.
I don't know. I thought isotonic drinks had to have some like electrolytes or salt in them.
Oh, I don't know. You tell me.
That's not something I would expect to find in beer, but hydrating for sure, because it's got a lot of water in it. But there's definitely a culture of it there. You're seeing running clubs kind of starting up around breweries, and often it tends to be non-alc because, after you've gone for a run, although, after you've gone for a race, an alcoholic beverage is great as a reward. But
Does it not make you feel just a bit sick and weird?
Oh, it makes you feel kind of a bit drunk. And,
yeah.
But then it's a cheap night.
Did you have a pint after the Dragon's Back?
After the Dragon's Back, I had 2 pints, and then I did nearly pass out.
Yeah, I bet.
But then I was going to pass out anyway.
How long had you been running for? Like 2 days? No, week.
No, a week, yeah. So it's 6 days. From the north of Wales right through to the south. So you start at Conwy Castle on the north coast.
Yeah.
And then you finish at Cardiff Castle on the south coast, obviously. So it's 6 days, 240 miles.
Yeah.
But it's the elevation is the killer, because you've got 18 or 19,000 meters up and down to go. So it's like 2 Everests from sea level, 2 and a bit, in 6 days, plus 240 miles.
Oh my God.
So yes, I had 2 beers after that.
Are you going to do it again?
No.
Oh, really?
No, well, I did it once, so...
Yeah, but because sometimes those things, people say, like, never again, but then, a year later, they're back.
I think the thing is, there's so many races now that it sort of seems like a bit of a missed opportunity if you keep doing the same one when you could be doing another. The guys that organise Dragon's Back do another one in Scotland called Cape Wrath.
Yeah.
Which goes from Fort William to Cape Wrath, which is effectively the northern bit. So you go all the way up the kind of west, that super remote, like Western Island bit by the sea. So that one's an option because it's a similarly horrendous experience, I'm told.
Brilliant.
But no, there's just so many races on the calendar that you kind of, you want to kind of do as much as you can.
And how do you combine being in the drinks business with being like an ultra, elite athlete? Because there do seem to be a few of those around in the drinks industry.
Yeah, there's a handful.
Probably not on quite a par with you, perhaps. But...
Well, there's Francois de Haine, isn't there?
Oh yes,
who was a winemaker, but I believe not anymore.
Yeah, and there's another one, isn't there, who's got a wine brand?
Is there?
Yeah, there is someone else. I've forgotten his name.
So what you got your finger on the pulse. You are, in fact, I would say possibly you are the pulse in some ways. Maybe you are setting the trend. It's like that really bad James Bond film where there's the journalist newspaper guy who's like making the news so that he can write about it so he can sell newspapers. I'm not saying there's anything weird going on there with you, but you are setting some trends, I think, just by exposing people to them. So what do you think is coming next? I know it's a boring question, like what trends are coming next, but what are you writing about at the moment?
Well, obviously we talked about non-alc. That's not going anywhere. I think I'm pleased to see a return to simpler drinks and seeing drinks as part of a whole kind of experience rather than the sort of nitty-gritty of the drink making, the process just being the focus, and the bartender's ego being the focus. As much as I love many bartenders, you know, it's only part of it. I think actually sitting here surrounded by all these whiskies, I mean, you here at BlackRock were such an early, you know, brilliant platform for sort of world whiskey, but I think that's really, really interesting, and giving Scotch whiskey a run for its money now in terms of finding new ways to talk about whiskey and bringing different people into the category. I'm fascinated to see what happens with the Agave, which has just been insane. But I had a really nice chat with Jake Berger the other night about the fact that just everybody who comes into his bar now orders spicy margaritas, and he's just had enough of it and wants people to drink cognac.
Yeah.
So let's see. Maybe cognac will make a comeback.
That would be something.
Yeah.
That really would be something. Brandy and eau de vie, and it would be an interesting one though, because it's definitely a category that I think is probably under recognised in the UK anyway.
Yeah, and yet so integral to cocktail culture.
Yeah,
historically.
sure. Yeah, historically. Yeah, I mean, it was in there right from the start, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about like 90s and Oasis, and I know you did write a piece recently about like sort of style bars potentially making a comeback, or
Oh, what sort of sleazy bars?
yeah. That's, they're interchangeable as far as I can tell.
Well, I think I was just feeling really, really bored of people going on about their aura rings and their sleep patterns and wellness and all this kind of stuff. And believe me, I definitely have my wellness moments. But I then felt like I visited a few bars in succession which were just going for a sort of more naughty vibe again, and particularly going to this bar Tigre in New York, which is the new bar from Maison Première, that team. And it has a slightly kind of tastefully sleazy vibe, sort of 70s vibe, with sort of micro suede banquettes and chainmail curtains and things like that. And, you know, I was served a cigarette martini by a waitress who said it tastes like kissing someone who'd smoked a cigarette. And I just liked the slightly sort of screw it naughtiness about it. And so I just wanted to revel in that a bit.
Well, that'll be a refreshing turn of events if that becomes the next thing. I mean, maybe that will sort of naturally evolve into loads of dive bars as well.
Yeah, yeah. I also liked the fact that a lot of these places are creating spaces that are more sort of private, or sort of creating environments maybe where you're not encouraged to get your phone out, or they're just too plain dark to take a picture in, or something like that. So sort of moving away from that. Like, we saw a lot of bars that really courted Instagram. Yeah. Didn't we?
Like the Speakeasy. So this is like, I might coin a term here, Speaksleezy.
Speaksleezy! Oh, I can't believe I missed the opportunity to use that.
You're going to have to write another article.
I am. Thank you.
Right, Alice Lascelles, thanks so much. Where can we find you?
Probably propping up a bar mixing martinis near you soon.
And your digital version or print version, so Financial Times, How to Spend It?
Financial Times, yep, and Instagram, I guess. It's all there.
Cool. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Great.
Speaksleezys.